2 a.m. when everything changed. What started as just two boys sharing silence in the dark turned into the gay love story I never thought I'd live. A forbidden kiss, a secret touch, something I had dreamed of but never believed could happen. That night, our friendship crossed into dangerous, beautiful territory, and nothing was ever the same. When I think back to that summer, I can still feel the sticky warmth of late nights, the hum of a fan pushing around heavy air, and the quiet comfort of knowing he was in the next room. We were just two guys, friends, nothing more. At least, that's what I told myself. He had been my closest friend for years, the one who always had my back when the world felt sharp and unkind. We studied together, played video games until sunrise, crashed on each other's couches, and shared secrets that would have felt too heavy to give anyone else. On the surface, our bond was simple and natural, what you'd expect of two young men navigating life side by side. But underneath, for me at least, there was something I could never say aloud. I had been carrying it for years. The way my eyes lingered too long when he laughed, how his arm brushing mine set off sparks I had to hide. The way I'd imagined what it might be like if he reached for me instead of pulling back. It was my secret, my weight, my truth. I told myself it was harmless. Just thoughts, just daydreams. He was straight, or so I believed, and I was too afraid to risk the friendship that meant more to me than anything. That summer, he stayed over at my place more often than usual. His own apartment had problems. Broken AC, noisy neighbors, and mine became the refuge. We set up a routine, order cheap takeout, binge shows, argue about stupid plot holes, and crash wherever we landed. The living room usually littered with blankets and empty soda cans. There was nothing unusual about it, at least to anyone else. But for me, every small detail mattered. The way he tossed me one of his shirts when mine got sweaty, the way his hair stuck up in the mornings, the sound of his laugh echoing against my walls. Sometimes, I caught myself staring too long, watching him when he wasn't looking, memorizing the curve of his jawline in the glow of the TV. I hated myself for it, hated the longing that crept in like an uninvited guest. I wanted to believe I could bury it, that I could live with being just friends. But late nights had a way of stripping away the walls we built. It was around 2 a.m. when things usually quieted down. The world outside faded, the streets emptied, and it felt like we were the only two people awake. Those hours were dangerous, because that's when conversations turned softer, more vulnerable. That's when I almost slipped, when I almost said what I felt. I'd stop myself just in time, masking it with jokes or yawns. But the truth was always on the tip of my tongue. One night, we were lying on opposite ends of the couch, the blue glow of the TV flickering over us. He was half asleep, his voice low, drowsy. "You ever think about what it'd be like if life was different?" he asked suddenly. I froze. The question was so vague, but my heart leapt. "Different how?" I asked carefully. "I don't know," he said, yawning. "Like, if we were somewhere else. If people didn't expect us to be a certain way all the time." I didn't know what he meant. Or maybe I did, but I was too scared to believe it. Instead, I mumbled something neutral and let the silence settle back in. But that question replayed in my mind long after he'd fallen asleep. It wasn't just a friendship anymore, not for me, and I was starting to wonder if it wasn't so simple for him either. Another night, he came back from a party smelling faintly of beer and cologne, his cheeks flushed. He collapsed onto my bed instead of the couch, groaning about how tired he was. I laughed it off, tossing a pillow at him, but secretly my pulse quickened. He stretched out, taking up space like he owned it, his arm draped casually across where I usually slept. "Your bed's more comfortable," he muttered. "You're drunk," I said. "Maybe," he grinned, his eyes half closed. "But it's true." I couldn't sleep that night, not with him inches away, breathing slow and steady. Every shift he made tugged at the edges of my restraint. I stared at the ceiling, telling myself to breathe, to calm down, to not make this into something it wasn't. But in my chest, it already was. These moments piled up, small, seemingly insignificant. But to me, they meant everything. They were cracks in the wall I had built to protect myself. Cracks I couldn't stop staring at. And then one night, Something happened that told me things were about to change. We were sitting on the balcony. The city lights stretched out before us. It was late, close to 2 a.m. again, and the quiet was heavy but comfortable. He leaned back in his chair, sighing deeply, and for a moment, I just looked at him. The glow of the streetlight softened his features, and I realized how badly I wanted to reach across the space between us. He caught me staring. Not just a glance, but really caught me. His eyes locked onto mine, and instead of looking away, he held it. There was no smirk, no teasing remark, just this heavy silence that made my stomach flip. "What?" he asked softly, almost like he already knew. I panicked. I laughed it off, muttered something about being tired, and stood up quickly. But the way he watched me as I walked inside, steady, unblinking, almost searching, stayed with me. That was the moment I knew something was shifting between us. And whether I was ready or not, the night I had always dreamed was inching closer. The next few days blurred into each other, the way summer always does when you don't have responsibilities anchoring you to a schedule. He practically moved into my apartment by then, his stuff scattered across my living room like he belonged there. Half-empty water bottles, a backpack always leaning against the wall, his sneakers kicked off wherever he dropped them. I pretended to be annoyed, rolling my eyes at the mess, but secretly I loved it. The place felt fluid a minute, less like a box I lived in and more like a home. We fell into habits. Lazy mornings where we ordered breakfast sandwiches, afternoons spent gaming or arguing about which movie to watch, late nights where neither of us seemed to want to sleep. It was ordinary and yet not, because every moment carried a weight I couldn't name out loud. Every laugh, every glance, every accidental brush of his hand against mine felt like something charged, something that was building toward a point of no return. And maybe he felt it too. I noticed little things, how his eyes lingered on me longer than before, how he'd sometimes pause mid-sentence like he was holding something back. One night, he was scrolling through my phone looking for a playlist, and I caught him staring at a photo of the two of us. It was from last year, a blurry selfie after a concert, both of us sweaty and grinning like idiots. "You still have this?" he asked. His voice was soft, almost surprised. "Yeah." I shrugged, trying to play it cool. It was a good night. He didn't say anything else, but he smiled in this quiet, almost shy way before putting the phone down. That smile stayed with me. Another night, he insisted on cooking dinner, if you could call boiling pasta and dumping jarred sauce cooking. We ate at the kitchen table, the overhead light too bright, casting shadows on his face. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, watching me as I talked about something random, something stupid. And for a second, I swear it wasn't just friendly attention. It felt heavier, intimate, like he was memorizing me the way I always memorize him. I looked away first. My chest was tight, my stomach knotted. Then there were the touches. Small things, nothing anyone else would notice. His hand grazing mine when he passed me something. The way he bumped my shoulder when he walked by. One night, he reached out to brush lint off my shirt, his fingers lingering just a second too long. It was nothing, really, but to me it was everything. The silence between us started to feel louder than our conversations. There were moments where words weren't necessary, where the air between us seemed to say more than we dared. It all came to a head one evening when the power went out. A summer storm had rolled through, knocking out the electricity in half the neighborhood. We lit a couple candles, the flickering glow painting the walls in soft, golden light. The air was heavy, humid, but neither of us seemed to care. We sat cross-legged on the floor, a deck of cards between us, laughing about how cliché it all felt. At one point, I looked up and caught him staring, not in a casual way, not like he was bored or distracted. He was looking at me like I was the only thing in the room. "What?" I asked, my voice catching in my throat. "Nothing," he said quickly, looking away. But his ears were pink, and his smile was small, nervous. I wanted to ask. I wanted to press. But instead, I just shuffled the cards and let the moment slip away. Later that night, after the storm had passed and the apartment was quiet, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. He was asleep on the couch, or at least I thought he was, But then I heard soft footsteps in the hallway. My bedroom door creaked open slightly, light spilling in from the street lamp outside. "Can't sleep?" I whispered. He stepped inside, rubbing the back of his neck. "Yeah, mind if I—" He gestured vaguely toward the bed. My heart skipped. "Sure," I said, trying to sound casual. He climbed in beside me, the mattress dipping under his weight. We lay there in the dark, inches apart, not touching. I could feel the heat radiating from his body, hear the rhythm of his breathing. Every nerve in me was on fire. "Remember when we were kids," he murmured. "And we used to stay up all night talking?" "Yeah," I whispered back. "This feels like that," he said softly. I didn't respond. I couldn't. My throat was too tight, my heart hammering too loud. I wanted to roll over, to close the space between us, to finally say what I'd buried for so long. But I didn't. I stayed frozen, staring into the dark. Eventually, his breathing evened out, and I told myself he'd fallen asleep. But I lay awake for hours, wide-eyed, every muscle tense. Because that night, the line between us blurred just a little more. The next morning, nothing was said. He acted like it hadn't happened, like sharing a bed was normal. Maybe it was for him, but for me, it was another crack in the wall, another sign that something was building between us that neither of us could ignore forever. And I couldn't shake the feeling that it was only a matter of time before it broke open completely. The days stretched on, and with every passing hour, the space between us seemed to shrink. He had gone from being just my friend, my late-night confidant, to something far more complicated, a constant presence I couldn't separate from my thoughts. It wasn't just that he was around all the time. It was how he was around, how he lingered in the kitchen while I cooked, leaning against the counter like he belonged there, how he sprawled across my couch, legs stretched out, as if my living room was designed for him, how he fell asleep mid-movie, his head dropping onto my shoulder like it was the most natural thing in the world. And every time he did, I told myself not to read into it. Friends did that. Friends leaned close. Friends stayed over. Friends blurred lines. But deep down, I knew it wasn't the same. Not for me. There were nights when the quiet felt unbearable. Nights when we sat side by side, the TV flickering in front of us, but neither of us paying attention. I'd feel his knee brush against mine, and instead of pulling away, I'd stay perfectly still. Maybe he noticed. Maybe he didn't. But to me, that silence was louder than any words. One night, he brought a bottle of cheap wine. "For the vibe," he said with a smirk, setting it down on the table. We weren't wine people, not really, but we poured ourselves glasses anyway, laughing at how bitter it tasted. One glass turned into two, then three. The room grew hazy, our laughter a little too loud, our words a little too honest. At some point, he asked, "Do you ever think about what if things had been different?" I frowned. "Different how?" He shrugged, swirling his glass. "I don't know. Like, if we'd taken different paths. If we'd chosen different things." I wanted to ask what he meant. I wanted to dig, to pull the truth out of him. But I was scared that if I asked, he'd give an answer I couldn't handle. So instead, I laughed it off. "Man, you're getting deep on this cheap wine." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Later, when we were cleaning up, his hand brushed against mine as we reached for the same glass. Neither of us moved. For one suspended second, our fingers rested together, still and quiet. Then, almost too quickly, he pulled back. "Sorry," he muttered, though his voice was strained. "Yeah," I whispered, even though I wasn't sure what I was apologizing for. That night, I lay awake again, staring at the ceiling. The air felt heavier now, charged with everything unsaid. The tension between us became its own language. At the grocery store, his hand lingered on my back as he guided me through the crowd. At the park, he stretched out beside me on the grass, his arm brushing against mine, too close for too long. In the middle of conversations, he'd look at me like he was about to say something important, then stop himself, swallowing the words. It was driving me crazy, this game of almost, this dance around the truth. And then came the night that tipped everything. It was another late one, the clock blinking past 1:30 a.m. We were sitting in the dim glow of my living room, an old playlist humming in the background. He was stretched out across the couch, and I was on the floor, leaning against the edge. "You know," he said suddenly, his voice low, "I don't think I've ever been this comfortable with anyone before." I turned to look at him, heart pounding. "What do you mean?" He hesitated, chewing on his lip. I don't know. Like I can just be with you." I swallowed hard, unsure how to respond. "Yeah, same." He shifted, sliding down so that his face was closer to mine, his arm dangling over the edge of the couch. Our eyes locked, and for a moment, the whole world seemed to narrow to that single line of sight. His expression was unreadable, something between curiosity and longing, maybe even fear. My breath caught. I thought he might say it. I thought he might cross the line we'd both been circling. But instead, he whispered, "It's late. We should probably crash." And just like that, the moment slipped away again. Except this time, it didn't disappear entirely. This time, it left a mark, a spark that wouldn't go out. I lay in bed afterward, wide awake, the echo of his words playing over and over my mind. I don't think I've ever been this comfortable with anyone before. What was he trying to tell me? Was it just friendship? Or was it something more, something neither of us had the courage to admit? The uncertainty was eating me alive. And though I didn't know it then, everything was about to shift. Because the next night, the one where the clock struck 2 a.m. and lines finally blurred beyond repair, that was when the truth neither of us could escape finally came crashing to the surface. There's a strange weight to the hours after midnight. They're quieter, lonelier, almost dangerous, as if the world sheds its distractions and leaves only raw honesty behind. And it was in those hours, past 1, pushing 2, that everything between us began to shift into something I couldn't ignore anymore. It started small. We were sitting on the couch one night, lights dimmed, the faint hum of the city outside pressing against the glass. He had kicked his legs up, sprawled comfortably, while I sat at the far end, pretending to watch the movie playing in front of us. But I wasn't watching the movie. I was watching him. The way his eyes crinkled when he laughed, the way he tugged at the collar of his shirt absent-mindedly, the way he stretched his arms behind his head like he owned the space. It was unbearable. My chest tightened, my pulse raced, and I had to keep reminding myself, he's just your friend. Except friends didn't make you feel like this. I don't remember what we were laughing about, but at some point, he leaned forward, eyes gleaming, and reached out to grab my wrist. It was innocent. He was emphasizing some dumb joke, but the heat of his skin against mine lit something inside me I couldn't extinguish. I froze. He didn't notice. Or maybe he did and chose not to acknowledge it. He let go a second later, and the absence of his touch hurt more than the contact itself. The silence that followed wasn't awkward, but it wasn't easy either. It was thick, charged, almost unbearable. And then he looked at me, really looked. His eyes lingered too long. His mouth parted slightly like he wanted to say something, but couldn't. My stomach knotted. "What?" I whispered, because I couldn't stand it anymore. He blinked, breaking the spell, and shook his head. Nothing. But it wasn't nothing. We both knew it. After that, I started noticing how often it happened. The stares, the touches, the moments where our conversations faltered, not because we ran out of things to say, but because something unspeakable hung between us. One evening, we were cooking dinner together, or rather, I was cooking while he stood behind me, stealing pieces of whatever I chopped. At one point, he leaned over my shoulder, his breath brushing against my neck as he reached for the salt. I nearly dropped the knife. "You're hopeless," I muttered, trying to mask the tremor in my voice. "Hopelessly hungry," he grinned, his face still too close, his presence swallowing me whole. I laughed weakly, but inside, panic roared. Did he realize what he was doing? Did he feel this tension too, or was it all in my head? That night, when we sat down to eat, I could barely taste the food. My whole body was buzzing, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure he could hear it. And when his knee brushed against mine under the table, he didn't move it. Neither did I. It was small, stupid, meaningless, except it wasn't because neither of us acknowledged it, and the silence around it spoke volumes. The danger wasn't just in what I felt. It was in what might happen if someone else noticed. The next weekend, a couple of our friends came over for drinks. The apartment filled with laughter, the clinking of bottles, the smell of pizza. It should have been easy, normal. But the whole night, I caught him watching me. Across the table, mid-conversation. While he sipped his beer, his eyes kept finding mine. It wasn't obvious enough for anyone else to notice, but I felt it like a spotlight on my skin. At one point, one of our friends made a joke about us being basically married since we were always together. Everyone laughed, but I saw his expression shift just slightly. He smirked like it was funny, but his eyes flickered toward me, sharp, searching. My stomach twisted. Later, when everyone had left and the apartment was quiet again, he dropped onto the couch beside me with a sigh. "Good night," he muttered. "Yeah," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. There was a pause. Too long. His knee brushed mine again, deliberate this time. "You know they weren't wrong," he said suddenly, voice low. "About what?" My throat was dry. Us, always being together. It's kinda true. I swallowed, forcing a laugh. "Yeah, guess so." But the air was thick, and he wasn't smiling. He was staring again, that same unreadable look that made me feel both terrified and alive. I looked away first, pretending to yawn, pretending it didn't matter. But inside, I was unraveling. Because the truth was, I'd been dreaming of moments like this. Dreaming of him. And now, those dreams were bleeding into reality, whether I was ready for them or not. The worst part wasn't the confusion. It was a thrill. Every time he brushed against me, every time his eyes lingered, every time his voice dropped just a little lower when we were alone, I wanted more. And wanting more terrified me. Because what if I was imagining it all? What if he didn't feel the same, and I was projecting my own secret onto his every move? What if crossing that line meant losing him forever? Those questions kept me awake at night, staring into the dark. His face burned into my memory. And as much as I tried to bury it, to pretend it was just friendship, I knew the truth deep down. This was no longer just friendship. It was something else entirely. And sooner or later, it was going to break open. The night it finally cracked open didn't start out dramatic. In fact, it was as ordinary as any other. We'd spent the day running errands, eating greasy takeout, and arguing over which playlist to blast in the car. By the time we got back to my apartment, it was close to midnight, the streets outside quiet, the air heavy with late summer heat. He dropped onto the couch, kicking his shoes off. "I'm too wired to sleep," he muttered. "Same," I admitted, though my exhaustion was more emotional than physical. Being around him constantly was like holding my breath all day. I never truly exhaled. We put on some mindless show, but neither of us was paying attention. He stretched out, his legs brushing against mine. I didn't move. Couldn't. Every time he touched me, no matter how small, it was like my body betrayed me. Leaning closer when I should have pulled away. At one point, he shifted, lying sideways, his head resting on the arm of the couch. His gaze found mine, steady and unflinching. "What?" I asked softly, my voice cracking. "Nothing," he said, but his lips twitched like he was fighting back a smile. The silence between us thickened. I could hear the hum of the fridge in the kitchen, the faint whoosh of cars outside. Every sound felt amplified, except his breathing, which was all I could focus on. Then it happened. He reached out, his fingers brushing my wrist again, but this time he didn't let go. His touch was tentative, testing. My pulse raced so violently I was sure he could feel it through my skin. I froze, staring at our hands, too scared to move. "You're warm," he murmured, the words absurd, but his tone wasn't casual. I swallowed hard. "So are you." He chuckled softly, but he didn't pull away. Instead, his thumb traced the inside of my wrist, slow, deliberate. My entire body lit up with electricity. I couldn't take it anymore. "Why are you doing this?" I whispered. His eyes flicked to mine. In the low light, they were unreadable, dark, and searching. "I don't know," he said honestly. And then the world tilted, because he leaned closer. It wasn't sudden, it wasn't dramatic. It was slow, hesitant, like he was giving me every chance to stop him. Our faces were inches apart, his breath ghosting across my cheek. My heart hammered so loudly I could barely think. But just as his lips were about to touch mine, he pulled back. The space between us roared with what almost happened. "I shouldn't," he muttered, dragging a hand through his hair. "Yeah," I said quickly, though my voice was shaky. "Yeah, me neither." We sat there, staring at the blank TV screen, the weight of the unsaid crushing down on us. My skin still burned where he had touched me, and the absence of his lips on mine ached in a way I couldn't admit. The next day, nothing was normal. We tried. We acted like it hadn't happened. But the air between us was different now. Charged, fragile, dangerous. When he handed me a coffee, his fingers brushed mine and we both flinched. When he leaned over my shoulder to read something on my phone, his breath caught, and so did mine. Every interaction felt like a replay of the night before, like we were circling a fire we both wanted to touch but couldn't. Later that week, the fire nearly consumed us. It was another late night, close to 2 a.m. We were sitting on the floor this time, backs against the couch, a half-empty bag of chips between us. The conversation had wandered into deeper territory, childhood dreams, regrets, things we never said out loud to anyone else. He was quieter than usual, his eyes distant. Then, out of nowhere, he said, "Do you ever feel like you're living the wrong version of your life?" The question hit me like a punch. Sometimes, I admitted. "Why?" He hesitated, then whispered, "Because I think about things I shouldn't, want things I'm not supposed to want." My chest tightened. "Like what?" His gaze snapped to mine, raw and unguarded. For a moment, I thought he'd say it. I thought he'd confess the truth I'd been terrified to hope for. But instead, he looked away. "Forget it. It doesn't matter." Except it did matter. It mattered more than anything. The silence that followed was unbearable. I could feel my whole body trembling, the words clawing at my throat. I wanted to scream, "I know. I feel it too. You're not alone." But I didn't. I couldn't. And then, almost as if he couldn't hold it back anymore, he reached out and touched my face. It was light, almost accidental, his fingers brushing my jaw as if testing the boundary. I stopped breathing. "You," he started, then cut himself off, shaking his head. "What?" My voice cracked. His hand lingered for a second longer, then fell away. "Nothing. I just shouldn't." But the look in his eyes betrayed him. And in that moment, I knew this wasn't just me imagining things. He felt it too. The problem was, neither of us knew what to do about it. Because once you cross a line like that, you can never go back. The days after that night were torture. It felt like we were holding a secret that neither of us dared to name out loud. Every glance carried a question. Every silence carried an answer. We tried to go back to normal, ordering takeout, joking about dumb stuff, sitting shoulder to shoulder on the couch. But it was impossible. The memory of his hand on my face, his breath so close, lived between us like a ghost that refused to leave. I told myself it was nothing, that we were just tired, that I had imagined the way his voice cracked when he said he wanted things he wasn't supposed to want. But deep down I knew, we both knew, the tension only grew. One evening, a couple of our friends stopped by unannounced. The apartment filled with laughter and music. The easy chaos of people drinking and telling stories too loudly. On the surface, everything was fine. But underneath, I felt his eyes on me every time I looked away. At one point, someone joked again about how we were basically joined at the hip. "Careful," one friend teased. "People are going to start thinking you're dating." Everyone laughed. I laughed too loudly, too forced. But when I dared to glance at him, his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. His jaw was tight, his fingers tapping nervously against a beer bottle in his hand. For one terrifying second, I thought he might say something, admit something, out loud, in front of everyone. But he didn't. He just looked at me, really looked, and I had to glance away before the weight of it broke me. After everyone left, the silence was suffocating. "Sorry about that," I muttered, pretending to clean up the empty bottles. "Sorry about what?" His voice was too calm. You know, the jokes. He shrugged, but his tone was sharp. It's not like they're wrong. I froze. What do you mean? He shook his head, forcing a smile that looked like it hurt. Forget it. But I couldn't. His words gnawed at me, long after he went to bed on the couch. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my heart pounding so hard I thought I might be sick. I couldn't keep pretending anymore. Something was happening, something real, and no amount of silence or denial was going to erase it. The breaking point came the following night. It was late. Of course it was late. The city outside had gone quiet, the streets bathed in the orange glow of street lamps. Inside, only the soften of the fridge filled the silence. He was sprawled on the couch, half asleep, scrolling aimlessly on his phone. I was sitting on the floor again, my back against the edge, pretending to read. My hands trembled on the page. "Hey," he said suddenly, his voice rough with sleep. "Yeah. Why you always look like you're carrying something heavy?" I blinked, caught off guard. "What?" He sat up a little, peering at me. "I don't know. Sometimes it feels like you're holding back, like there's something you're not saying." My throat tightened. I stared at the book in my hands, the words blurring. Maybe I am. Silence. Then, like what? I swallowed hard. My heart was pounding so violently it hurt. "You first." For a long time, he didn't answer. I could feel him watching me, the weight of his stare pressing against the side of my face. Then, finally, he whispered, "You know what?" The air left my lungs. Before I could think, before I could stop myself, I turned to face him. His phone was forgotten, his eyes dark and burning into mine. The space between us felt alive, crackling with everything we'd been too afraid to admit. "Say it," I whispered. He shook his head, a bitter laugh escaping. "I can't." So I did the only thing I could. I closed the space between us. The kiss was soft, hesitant, almost clumsy, but it was real. His lips against mine, warm and trembling, sent a shock through my whole body. For a heartbeat, I thought he'd pull away, but he didn't. Instead, he leaned into it, his hand finding the side of my face, holding me there like he'd been waiting years for this moment. It didn't last long, just a few stolen seconds. But when we pulled apart, the silence was deafening. His eyes were wide, his chest heaving. "We shouldn't have done that," he whispered, though his voice shook. "Do you regret it?" I asked, my voice breaking. He didn't answer right away. He just stared at me, his expression torn between fear and longing. Finally, he whispered, "No, that's the problem." The world spun. Everything I had buried, every dream I had tried to smother, was suddenly alive and terrifyingly real. But along with the thrill came something darker. Fear. Because if anyone found out, if anyone saw, everything could fall apart. And yet, sitting there in the quiet at 2 a.m., his lips still burning on mine, I knew there was no turning back. The kiss replayed in my mind 1,000 times before morning. I couldn't sleep. I didn't even try. My lips still tingled. My chest still ached with the weight of it. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, knowing I had just crossed a line I'd spent years pretending wasn't there. And worse, I didn't regret it. When I finally dragged myself out of bed, the apartment was quiet. He was gone from the couch. For one terrifying moment, I thought he'd left altogether, fled in the night after what we'd done. But then I heard the faint hiss of the shower. I sat at the table, my hands trembling around a mug of coffee, waiting for him to emerge. Every second felt stretched thin, strung tight with the weight of what we'd shared. When he finally walked into the kitchen, hair damp, shirt clinging to him, he didn't look at me. He poured himself a glass of water, his movement stiff, deliberate. "Morning," I said softly. "Morning." His voice was flat, unreadable. The silence between us was unbearable. I wanted to reach out, to rewind to those seconds when his lips pressed against mine, when everything felt like it made sense. But instead, we stood there like strangers, pretending the world hadn't shifted overnight. Finally, I couldn't take it. "Are we going to talk about it?" He froze. For a long moment, he didn't answer. Then slowly he turned to face me. "What is there to talk about?" My heart sank. You kissed me back. He flinched at my words like I'd struck him. Yeah, and that was a mistake. The words cut deep, sharper than I expected. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. Do you mean that? He ran a hand through his hair, pacing the kitchen like a caged animal. I don't know what I mean. I just know this is dangerous. This isn't who we're supposed to be. The weight of his words pressed down on me, heavy and suffocating. Then why did you? I whispered. He stopped, staring at me with something raw in his eyes, because I couldn't stop myself. My breath caught. For a moment, neither of us moved. The admission hung in the air, trembling between us. It was both everything I had wanted to hear and the thing I feared most, because it meant this wasn't one-sided. It was real, and real meant it could destroy us. The day dragged on in silence. We avoided each other, orbiting the same small space without colliding. Every glance, every brush of movement, carried the weight of what had happened. That evening, he suggested we go for a walk. The air outside was cooler than it had been in days, the streets alive with the hum of the city. We walked side by side, our hands occasionally brushing, neither of us brave enough to take the next step. At one point, he stopped, shoving his hands into his pockets. Do you ever think about what people would say if they knew? I swallowed hard. All the time. He nodded, his jaw tight. I don't think I can handle it. My family, our friends, they wouldn't understand. Maybe they don't need to know, I whispered. His eyes met mine, conflicted, torn. Secrets don't stay secrets forever. We fell into silence again, the city lights reflecting in his eyes. I wanted to tell him I didn't care, that I'd risk it all just to keep him close. But the words stuck in my throat. That night, back at the apartment, the tension boiled over. We sat across from each other, the silence too heavy, too suffocating. Finally, he broke. I don't know what this is, he said, his voice low, shaking. I don't know what we're doing. I leaned forward, my heart pounding. It's real. That's what it is. He shook his head, burying his face in his hands. It can't be. Why not? My voice cracked, desperation spilling out. Because you're my best friend, he snapped, looking up at me, his eyes blazing. Because if this goes wrong, I lose everything. You, us, all of it. His words silenced me, because he was right. We sat there, breathing hard, both of us trembling with the weight of it all. Then, softer this time, he whispered, I don't want to lose you. My chest ached. Then don't. For a long time, he just stared at me, his expression torn in half. And then, as if gravity pulled us together, he leaned forward again. The kiss this time was different. Not hesitant, not clumsy. It was desperate, urgent, filled with everything we'd been holding back for years. I clutched at his shirt, pulling him closer, my whole body shaking. He kissed me like he was afraid I'd disappear, like this was the only chance we'd ever get. When we finally broke apart, gasping for air, his forehead pressed against mine, he whispered, We're in trouble. And I whispered back, I know. Because in that moment, I realized the truth. We'd already passed the point of no return. We sat there on the couch, breath still ragged, lips swollen from the second kiss. His forehead leaned against mine, and for a moment, I let myself believe this could last, that somehow the world outside wouldn't matter as long as we stayed here, just the two of us. But then the sound of footsteps in the hallway shattered the silence. We sprang apart, almost in panic, as his older brother's voice echoed outside the door. He froze, eyes wide, and whispered, If he comes in. I held my breath, pulse hammering in my throat. The doorknob rattled. Then, mercifully, it stopped. After a pause, the footsteps faded. We sat in silence, our hearts pounding so loud it felt like the whole building could hear. That's what I mean, he said hoarsely, his hands shaking. We can't do this. He stopped himself, swallowing hard. We almost ruined everything. The words stung, but I forced myself to answer softly. We didn't ruin anything. We're just figuring it out. His eyes glistened in the dim light. You don't understand. My family, if anyone knew. I reached for his hand, but he pulled back like my touch burned him. That rejection, that tiny flinch, cut deeper than any words. I stood, pacing the room. So what then? We just pretend it didn't happen? Pretend I don't feel this. He buried his face in his hands, groaning. God, I don't know. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. Anger flared in my chest, tangled with heartbreak. You kissed me too. Twice. Don't act like I'm the only one guilty here. His head snapped up, eyes blazing. You think I don't know that? You think I haven't been torturing myself since it happened? We stood there, two people caught in a storm we had no map for. Finally, his voice cracked. I don't want this to destroy us. It already has, I whispered. The silence that followed was unbearable. Later that night, I heard him moving around in his room, drawers opening and shutting, the zip of a bag. My chest tightened with dread. When I walked to his doorway, he was shoving clothes into a backpack. What are you doing? He didn't look at me. I can't stay here. Not after this. I need space. We need space. Panic surged through me. So, you're just gonna leave? Run away like it never happened? He finally looked up, and his eyes were red, glassy. If I stay, I'll do it again. The honesty of it broke me. I stepped inside, my voice trembling. And what if that's not a bad thing? His lips parted, like he wanted to answer, but no words came. Instead, he looked away, his jaw tight. I'm not strong enough for this, he whispered. Not yet. I wanted to beg him to stay, to fight for what we both knew was real. But the look on his face told me the truth. He was terrified. Terrified of what this meant. Terrified of himself. Terrified of me. When he brushed past me with his bag slung over his shoulder, the apartment felt hollow, empty. I stood there in the dark long after he left, the memory of his kiss still burning on my lips. The next day was worse. Everywhere I went, I felt his absence. The silence was deafening. My phone stayed stubbornly blank. No messages, no calls. I tried to tell myself he needed time, that he'd come back when the fear faded. But as the hours stretched into days, hope felt more like a wound than a comfort. One night, I got a call from him. My heart leapt when I saw his name, but his voice on the other end was broken, cautious. I can't see you right now, he said. I'm sorry. The words twisted like a knife. So that's it? After everything, we just cut it off? I don't know what else to do, he whispered. I can't breathe when I'm around you. I can't think. I want you too much, and it terrifies me. Tears stung my eyes. And you think running away will fix that? I think it's the only way I don't lose you completely. Silence hung heavy between us. Finally, he whispered, I'm sorry, and the line went dead. That night, I sat by the window, staring out at the city lights. Everything felt hollow. The kiss had given me everything I had ever dreamed of, and taken more than I was prepared to lose. The taste of him was still on my lips. His voice still echoed in my chest. But all I had left was the silence he left behind. And in that silence, I realized something. Some nights don't end in love stories. Some nights just end, but they haunt you forever. The days after felt endless. I kept replaying every second of that night. The way his eyes had softened before he leaned in, the way his lips trembled against mine, the sound of his voice when he whispered, We're in trouble. He was right. We were. Weeks passed, and life carried on like nothing had happened. People around me laughed, worked, moved forward, but I felt stuck in that moment at 2 a.m., caught between the boy I had known my whole life and the man I discovered in the dark that night. We didn't talk about it again. A few short messages here and there, but nothing real, nothing close to what we had shared. And yet, I couldn't let it go, because for the first time in my life, I had felt something that was more than friendship, more than comfort. It was raw, dangerous, and beautiful. Sometimes, late at night, I imagine what would have happened if he had stayed. If fear hadn't pulled him away, maybe we would have destroyed each other. Or maybe, just maybe, we would have built something unforgettable. All I know is that his kiss didn't just change our friendship. It changed me. Some things can be hidden. Some things can be buried. But some things live under your skin forever. That night at 2 a.m. became mine. my secret, my heartbreak, my first real love story. If this gay love story touched something inside you, I want to hear from you. Comment below one word that captures how this forbidden romance made you feel: heartbroken, seen, confused, or maybe hopeful. This was more than just a first kiss between two boys. It was a secret, a risk, and a truth we couldn't hide. Share your own LGBTQ plus story if you've ever faced a love that felt impossible. Your voice matters here. Let's make this space real, raw, and ours.